Today, I am super excited to have Linda Backman on the show. Linda is a psychologist, researcher, author, and hypnotic regression therapist. She has been in private practice for over 40 years. Through hypnotic regression, she has guided thousands of clients to access their past lives and the time between lives, helping them to surface and understand the challenges of their souls, which are repeated life to life. Dr. Backman conducts training courses on past life and between lives regression. Convinced that our collective healing has an impact on the evolution of humanity and the unity of all peoples, she has made the understanding of the soul her priority. Linda studied and co-taught with Dr. Michael Newton. Dr. Backman founded the RavenHeart Center in Boulder, Colorado in 1997, where she regularly teaches the practice of soul regression hypnotherapy to practitioners. She is deeply focused on the development of a universal understanding and awareness of soul evolution. Dr. Backman is the author of Bringing Your Soul to Light, the Evolving Soul and Souls on Earth. Her books have been translated into several languages. Welcome to the program. Is it okay if I call you Linda? Would you rather Dr. Backman?
No, it's totally fine to call me Linda.
Great.
Nice
I thank you so much for coming on the show. So let's just jump right in. I'd love to hear about you. I know I just read your bio, but also a little bit about how you grew up and how you became a psychologist and then doing the kind of work that you're doing today.
Okay, well, I will not tell you my whole life story.
We don't have that much time.
I'll put it in small little pieces.
Great.
Well, how I became a psychologist is a little bit different and came before stepping into the kind of spiritual work that I do now. So how I became a psychologist back in my 20s, about age 25, I was pregnant with our second baby. That was a challenging pregnancy. It was a kind of a touch and go sort of pregnancy. And by the time I reached 26 weeks of an average 40-week pregnancy, I delivered that baby at 26 weeks, and he lived a few hours and passed. And that didn't catapult me into being spiritual at that point. But what it did sort of basically, and catapult, I think, is probably a good word. I discovered grief. I discovered loss. I discovered what we go through when we've had a child die. And so I became, I'll say, passionate and in some ways fascinated with grief. What happens when we're grieving a loss, and in particular, what happens when we're dealing with the loss of a child. So that returned me back to school and back to graduate school, and that, in making this a very short story, which it's not so short necessarily, but that's what led me to ultimately gain my doctoral degree and become a licensed psychologist. So then I worked for about 12 to 15 years in general private practice, doing grief work with people. But I also was doing all kinds of counseling, as you would imagine private practice looks like, which I enjoyed. Then, so all that started when I was 25. When about 20 years later, I always tell the story this way. I'm minding my own business as a psychologist, married, have children. And my original psychologist colleague with whom I built a group practice of psychologists and psychiatrists, sadly, in his early 30s, when I was in my mid 40s, he died from a type of lung cancer. Prior to that happening and what came after, I didn't really understand, Marla, I didn't understand the soul. I didn't understand reincarnation. I wasn't into that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When he passed, within about 48 hours, I was convinced he was talking to me from the other side. I was fully convinced I was receiving communication from him. His nickname was Bud. And along with just sensing his energy and his presence, I truly believed that he was showing me images of scenes of past lives we had shared. So I thought, again, being silly but serious, I thought either something really, psychologically unbalanced is going on for me, which I honestly didn't have the symptoms of that kind of thing. So I said to my husband, here's what I'm experiencing. My husband had known my colleague. They were golfing friends. I said, here's what's going on for me. And at that point, I think we'd been married about 20, 25 years. I explained to my husband what was going on, and he looked at me very calmly. And I looked back at him and I said, I could tell by the look on his face, I said, you don't think this is strange, what's coming out of my mouth, do you? And he said, no. And I said, why don't you think this is really weird? Because we'd never spoken about soul, reincarnation, and that sort of thing. And here's what he said. He said, only now did he remember something that occurred for him as a child. And he said, when I was a boy growing up, now I recall, he said, I remembered my past lives in detail. I knew they were real somehow. I was accessing details of my past lives. And he said, but I just tucked that all away because I figured, who in the heck is going to believe me about this? And so he forgot about it. He just kind of, repressed it and never spoke about it again and forgot. Yeah. So he just basically said, and he's not a psychologist. He's spent almost 30 years as an academic in political science. He said, if you're interested in this, go for it. Go read about it, go study. I'll go with you. I won't go with you. And so that was the door that opened. I'm sure, Marla, now that was my higher self and my guides, sort of offering up this option, it's kind of putting this out here in front of me and saying, Linda, what do you want to do with this? And that's how the journey began.
Wow. That's so fascinating that he said that. I mean, how often would that ever happen? It wouldn't happen in this household. It's just fascinating. And then that the two of you ended up together.
Well, and I think, what I want listeners to hear too, the wisdom is that my spiritual guides and his spiritual guides really were collaborating.
Yes.
They knew what would get triggered with him. And, obviously now the journey is 30 years later because the event I just described happened almost exactly 29 years ago. So they, and we all have guides,
Mm-hmm.
they knew what strings they were plucking.
Yeah.
And so they were aware of his spiritual interests. He had just tucked it all away.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I interviewed Dr. Tobin Hart, and he's a psychologist, and he was talking about his 4-year-old little girl one night, started talking about her angels. And without going into detail, she said, well, my angel knows your angel. That's when he started really listening, like, wow, it's not that she just wants to stay up later. And so it's kind of like, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So let's talk about past life regression. Can you define it or tell us what it is and why you find it helpful for others and yourself?
Yes. And I'll just say to listeners that I guide 2 types of regression.
Yes.
So they know that, and I'll explain the difference. So we'll start with past life, what I call past life soul regression. So essentially what that means is guiding the client to relax. Almost 99% of clients I work with have no trouble gaining information, because that's always a worry that clients have. Mm-hmm. So I guide the client to relax. And the bottom line is that the client is going to discover, with my support, except the client's receiving the information intuitively. I'm not operating as a channel. Not that there's anything wrong with people that are very capable channels. So the client is going to discover in detail a past life of theirs that relates directly to their life today. And it relates to directly either to something they're balancing from a past life, or what we would call karma that we need to release and balance, or it relates to something they accomplished in a past life that in life today they don't give themselves credit for accomplishing. So so many people think, oh my gosh, if I have a past life regression, I'm going to discover that I did something horrible.
Right.
That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
So the past life is chosen by the client's guides, and it's a life they need to know about that's having some effect, some relationship to their current life. It could be tied to people in their life, could be tied to a fear they need to release, could be tied to a health issue that needs to be let go of, but also can be tied to a skill they have that they're sort of trying to push aside that's been there since past life. It could be tied to something they've accomplished in the past that in life today they feel like they can't accomplish, and past lives build on one another. That's how our soul evolves. So if we've already accomplished being a committed parent, or accomplished comfortable abundance, or whatever, that capability is essentially embedded in the cellular memory of our soul. So that's past life regression.
Interesting. So I've had a few past life regressions, but just a general question. Let's say that someone is comfortably abundant, well said, in this life. And do you find sometimes that people then want to learn that they are then they live a life in extreme poverty to learn the opposite?
Yes, not because they necessarily need to live in poverty now, but yes, that their fears, their worries, their avoidances of, well, I can't buy that because it's too expensive, or, what I can't, I've always wanted to travel to X place, but I really shouldn't spend the money. If they've had a life of extreme poverty, it may be, you might say, holding them back today, and their guides want them to not let that, you might say, the trauma of the past life kind of weave its way into current life, that trauma is over and complete.
Right. And so is it always therapeutic for the patient? Sounds like it would be.
I love that you're asking that, Marla. The bottom line is, it is always intended to be therapeutic. It is not like, oh, let me just go see if I had a life where I lived in Egypt and, da, 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 da.
Right.
It's what's the purpose of the content of the regression? How is it meant to help the client in life today?
Mhm. So what kind of clients, what kind of help do they come to you for in terms of wanting a past life regression? And we'll get to in between lives here in a bit, but versus going to a medium or something like that.
It is just so broad. Sometimes they have an unexplained fear that they want to release, or they have an unexplained physical symptom that every time they go to, 2 or 3 doctors, there's nothing that they find that's wrong. So sometimes it's related to issues, struggles. Sometimes it's pure curiosity.
Right.
And there's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. People are just like, I'm fascinated with, I've just learned about reincarnation, or I'm fascinated with spirituality, and I just want to go see what I'll learn about past lives. it can be related to a relationship, one that is fantastic. So have they known that person before, or a problem in a friendship, a family relationship, and that sort of thing. So people come for, all kinds of reasons. What I'll say, and I always find this fun, fascinating, revelatory, when the client comes for actually either regression, I would say 9 times out of 10, learn useful information about themselves and about their current life and things that tie to past lives, that it's almost like their guides. I do this sort of thing, sort of like the guides get kind of all excited. It's like, okay, guides, I think about guides just like humans. Guides think, okay, what kind of information will help, if you were my client, Marla, will help Marla the most that they've never even thought about. So I have clients who learn things, positive, useful, beneficial things that they really didn't come to learn, that wasn't their intention, but their guides have used the impetus of, the interest in scheduling the regression to give them a much bigger picture of themselves.
Right. Interesting. And so this is sort of downloaded into the client, even though maybe they've never had any spiritual work or anything like that. It's just there for them.
Yes. And what a lot of clients, if they've never had a regression before, have a hard time accepting is that we're all capably intuitive in terms of gaining information about ourselves and information that comes from our spiritual guide, so that the person may not be some well-skilled medium or channel that can stand on a stage and give valid information, but we all have the ability to tap into our own soul and our own guides.
Mm-hmm. So Linda, did this kind of work help you understand about the baby that passed when you were really young?
That's a great question. And I always believe that when I'm doing something like this, sometimes the questions are downloaded into your brain because they're questions that are useful to ask. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's been a very long time now, of course, since that pregnancy and baby was born and passed. But yes, I came to understand many things, but to try to give a simple answer, I came to understand that I had had some past lives where I had children and I wasn't sufficiently committed to raising those children. I was more into my own needs than being as involved a parent as I needed to be. So this is not the whole explanation, but a piece of it is I needed to experience that loss. Essentially, the soul of the baby agreed, a soul agreed to be attached to that child and to, you might say, serve up an opportunity for me to deepen, to release actions of past lives. Now, but by the time I already had an older child at that time, a child that was 2.5, and I think most people that know me would agree with this. I was already a committed parent in current life,
yes.
But there was a deepening that needed to happen for me, and I think most people would understand that life can be like, how do I want to put this? Our life can be beneficial sandpaper, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
That those most challenging experiences are usually the greatest opportunity to move forward. And it was challenging. I mean, I went through 4 months of every 2 to 5 days I threatened to miscarry. And yes, I was balanced. The bottom line to your question is I was balancing my own past
Yes.
lives.
You meant before we get into between lives, you mentioned karma, and everyone has a different definition of karma. So, what is exactly karma, and how does it work in our lives?
That's also a great question, and but fairly simple to answer. So karma means that when we were incarnate in a prior life, we used our free will to make choices of actions and behaviors that were not the most useful. And so, I think about it like, I always use silly analogies. So, on Monday, if you're an elementary school child, on Monday, you get your spelling words, and on Friday, you're expected to pass the spelling test. But maybe on Tuesday and Thursday, there's a practice spelling test. And so you get those words, you study them, and let's just say on Tuesday, you have to take a practice spelling test, and you get 4 right and 6 wrong. But then you get another chance on Thursday. So it's like we can trip and fall,
Right.
and make inappropriate choices. But ultimately, we are expected to learn our spelling words and pass the test, or we are expected to realize we need to work harder to grow and evolve as a soul and clean up that karma, which is free will action.
I see. So, Linda, do you, I'm not going to say do you believe, are there specific entry points and exit points in terms of birth and death for people?
Ooh, that's a cool question. So are you saying, Marla, do we choose as a soul sort of when to come into body and when to leave that body?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Answer is yes. The more evolved. Okay. So as a soul, when we're not incarnate, we exist in what we might call the spiritual realm.
Yes.
Our guides, we all have spiritual guides. Our guides will say to us when we're not incarnate, okay, I'm going to back up an extra step. And maybe this has already been clear in what I've been saying. We are required to evolve. It's like children are required to be educated. So we're educated primarily in the body, not out of body. So our guides, if we're a young soul, our guides will say, okay, Linda soul, or okay, Marla soul, we really think soon another embodiment. It's time for another embodiment. Then we have the opportunity to plan. We sit down with our guides, we create a life plan, and then we come into body. And yes, when we're incarnate, at the soul level, we have the choice of, is that life going to last for 67 years? Is it going to last for 97 years? And at times, as hard as it is to have a child die, at times there is intention and purpose for someone to live 13 years, 22 years. It is possible that we may have completed our life contract, even at what seems to be way too young from a human vantage point.
Right. So let's talk about between life regressions. What is that?
Okay. So It's an you might call it an extended regression, or goes beyond past life. So what I call a between life soul regression is, first step is relaxation, second step is discovering a past life. And just as it happens in a past life regression, we go all the way to the final scene of the past life. We go all the way to when the client dies in the past life, which I do in just a past life regression as well. But the between life soul regression, at the point of dying in the past life and the soul leaving that past life body, which is far easier than humans might think, then we follow that natural soul journey. We follow that slice of the soul that caused that past life person to be alive, caused us to be alive in our past life. That fractal, that slice of our soul speeds up its frequency, leaves the physical body when the physical body is no longer functioning, and returns to the spiritual realm, and basically steps back into the totality of the soul, or reconnects with the higher self. And then in the regression, we work with guides. Guides always have benevolent information like, how did I plan my current life? Who are the souls I've incarnated with before? For what reason do I have this health issue? What am I supposed to learn from it? And the client brings questions to the regression. So the remainder of the regression is working at the client's soul level.
Interesting. Back to my previous question about this, the contract coming into when you come into the earth and when you leave this earthly realm. What about something like all the COVID deaths and the young people that have passed from that, or other things? Is it that what I have become to trust is that there are more than one exit point.
Yeah.
However, it is within that time frame. So in other words, let's say a 32-year-old passed from COVID. If it wouldn't have happened that way, it probably would have happened some other way in still that sort of time range of being around that age. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think in the case of a pandemic or a large natural disaster, or what's going on in the country of Ukraine, when there are that many souls leaving their bodies, I think in many cases, it's an unplanned leaving. It's an unplanned dying. As different from, how can I say it? So when there's a large group of souls and it's not just, a car accident happens and everybody else lives, but one person dies, then I think that is very possibly that the soul of that one person who passed, it was their time.
Right.
But in the case of huge numbers like the pandemic, I think it's an unplanned passing, and it just happens that way. Now, of course, I'm sure, listeners would expect me, to say and add this piece in that, souls can, they can almost not exactly turn around within 5 minutes, but a soul that passes could begin an incarnation theoretically 5 weeks later, 5 months later, 5 years later. So I think the hard part is we always have to be careful not to be too cut and dried from a human vantage point.
Right.
On the other hand, I never want to minimize the trauma to family and friends of having someone pass.
Yeah. I interviewed Carol Bowman. She was my first person I interviewed. And she worked with Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson and children, talking a lot about past lives. And one thing they talked about, which I heard you talk about, and you mentioned it earlier, is about fears or about phobias. And she had a story actually about her little boy who was 5, and he had this horrible fear. He had this terrible eczema and this horrible fear of booming. I mean, to the point where it was debilitating. And I guess she had hypnosis person over one night. I don't know, for her girlfriends or something, but he said she mentioned this to her, or she mentioned it to him, and he said, do you mind if I just spend a little bit of time? And she was right there, and took the child, I guess, through a past life regression, which is much different. And the phobia was gone.
Yeah.
It left. And then the eczema disappeared.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first stories she told. So can you talk? I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but as you talk, I have all these questions. So talk about phobias and how past life regressions can help those, what you found. Maybe you have a story.
Well, and I'll just say I've known Carol Bowman for years, and
Have you? Yeah,
know
she's
her
great.
personally and know her wonderful work. So, yeah. Well, if I want to be sure to touch on a couple of things that you've said. So if we have a phobia that really is unexplained in life today, it's not like we have enough current life issues, something that happened in current life that would explain it, that the phobia just seems too extensive,
yes,
to be related to current life, then it is almost a sure thing that it's related to past life. And as you said, which I'm so glad you used that example, we can literally have physiological ramifications of that past life. And so, is it a guarantee that once we latch on to the past life that explains the phobia? Is it a guarantee that the fear is completely gone and maybe the physical symptoms are completely gone? No. I mean, at times it does work that way. But what I find for people, even if it's not completely gone, coping with it and having an explanation takes away that almost kind of crazy feeling of, why do I worry about this? But there's no reason to worry about it.
right.
So that is how it works.
Yeah, that is so true. When you have sometimes even a diagnosis, or you have a reason for the way you react, it turns the table. It can change everything. What about, Linda? I heard you in another interview talk a little bit about going into a past life and asking about gender, about why you would come in. I hate to say why would you, because it's beautiful being sexually orientated in a different way, or transgender, but what have you learned about that?
Well,
I think what you said on the interview, what you were talking about, was that the souls, we really strive to be non-gender. We really strive to be more androgynous than we do one or the other. So could you just comment on that?
Yes, I think there's a number of things to say about that. One is, our soul does not have a gender.
Yes.
So, I think it's important for people to think about that. Our soul is androgynous. And so our soul is not male or is not female. Now, our soul, we may have experienced, virtually always, if we're a woman today, we've been a man in the past, and vice versa. And our soul may have experienced more male lives than female lives, but nonetheless, we've experienced both. if I work with a client who is, let's just say, LGBTQ, what I know in my head is that almost for sure I'm working with a rather experienced soul, because that soul has agreed before they came into body to push the envelope of society. That soul has agreed to push our humanly, if I can put it this way, ridiculous assumptions of there's something wrong with you if you happen to be LGBTQ. And so that is almost always, if people think about soul evolution, I like to make this a little left-brained. We evolve step by step by step as we grow and evolve. It can take 10, 20, 25 lives of living our soul intentions. We might say to go from level 1 to level 2 or level 2 to level 3. But if I'm working with someone who fits that LGBTQ framework, or that whole part of our world, I know I'm not working with a young soul, because a young soul wouldn't take on that agreement. And if someone is within that group of people, they've also had heterosexual lives.
Yes.
Yeah. That what has happened for me over the course of about 28 years of guiding regression and 40 plus years of being a psychologist is that my understanding of soul has just broadened and broadened and broadened by way of my clients. So I'll just add in, we can go down this road if you like, but what I've learned over the course of all these years of regression work is that there are souls that are designed primarily to incarnate in the human body. There are souls that are designed primarily to not incarnate in the human body. And those are either souls that come from somewhere in the greater spiritual realm, that the frequency that is not Earth, or those are souls could be that come from the angelic realm. So I've come to understand there are basically three, I call it soul origin. There are three types of souls that are conceived in the divine realm. Those that typically, not always, but typically embody in these human bodies on Earth, and then interplanetary souls, that's the term I've been given, coming from somewhere in the universe, but coming to Earth because they've been my clients. And their third category, there are souls that originate in the angelic realm that serves divine energy.
And do they come? Some of them come to the earth.
Yeah, I've learned about them through my clients who happen to be angelic souls.
Wow, interesting. What is kind of the ratio of the different souls that, or what do you think on this earthly planet?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I've learned, Marla, is that if we think about the entirety of the human population of souls on Earth, only approximately 5% of embodied souls on Earth are in the advanced category. And if we put numbers on that, somewhere between a 7 and a 9. So only 5% of humans are advanced souls. Then we have to take that 5% and split it apart. About 2.5 of that 5% are what I call earth-based souls. And I want to be sure people aren't hearing me say, because this often people mishear this. I'm not saying earthbound, because earthbound implies a stuckness, implies someone died and their soul isn't moving on. That's not what I'm saying. The term is earth-based, meaning the soul was designed to incarnate most of the time in the human body. So about 2.5 of that 5% are earth-based souls. And then the remaining 2.5% of the 5% has to be split in half. About half are interplanetary souls that are always advanced if they come here. That's the only reason they come here. And the other, 1.25% approximately are angelic realm souls. Angelic realm souls come to Earth because their energy is the I'm going to say the nature, maybe that's the best way to put it. The nature of an angelic soul's energy is pure love and compassion, pure, we might call it right-brained love and compassion.
Is that like what you would term the bodhisattvas from Buddhism?
Well, I'm not heavily steeped in Buddhism, but my understanding of the term bodhisattva is that that implies a highly evolved soul of any type.
Okay.
That's what I think that term means.
Right, right. Well, I know it's someone who could, well, what I've learned is that they have made the decision. Well, here's the little story is the first bodhisattva. It was, I think it was feminine, but it wasn't because it was a soul. But when they went back to the higher realm, they heard a child crying. And so they had to come back and help and come back. And they made the agreement that they'll keep coming back to help until no more help is needed, which will never be. So that's what I've learned too.
Well, just to respond to that, again, it's my understanding through regression that once a soul reaches, let's just say 8 and beyond, 8 and higher on that 10-point scale, whether they're earth-based, interplanetary, or angelic, they have the choice to keep coming back. And the reason they come back primarily is to aid humanity's evolution.
Yes.
In one way or another.
I love when you talk about in your book, bringing your soul to light. And you talk about how some souls are in kindergarten and some are in grad school. And this is so important. And it's so important for us not to judge and to understand that. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, if a soul, probably a couple of ways to look at this. So if someone is an embodied soul and they're a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 10, they're working on lower levels, not negative things, but lower levels of evolution. We've all been 1s, we've all been 2s, we've all been 3s, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been there. And so that they are simply working on gaining different skills. It's just like a child in 4th grade isn't taking high school senior level math, isn't even ready to take high school senior level math. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a progression. But another way to look at this, and I always hate the word but, and another way to look at this is often if I'm working with an interplanetary soul client. Now, let me just say, and I think I said this earlier, but often clients will come to me for a regression, and they'll learn things about themselves that they never even considered learning that will be highly beneficial. But most regression clients, what's revealed in a regression is beneficial and sometimes not what they thought they would be learning. And if I'm working with an interplanetary soul client, and that client may not yet know and understand that they're a soul that doesn't typically come to Earth, that client may be struggling with issues of being embodied on Earth because this is not the place they normally come. So that's
like me.
Totally.
Like you never quite fit in, right? I've always felt like that my whole life. I don't know what I am, but
never quite fit in. And then struggled with all kinds of things, and struggled with allergies, struggled with digestive issues, struggled with attention deficit issues, autoimmune disorders, energetic problems, and yet there, and this is what I want listeners to hear loud and clear, that if you are an interplanetary soul, you came into body because you are evolved, not a 10 on a scale of 10. I don't know that anyone really per se is a 10 on a scale of 10, but you brought your wisdom because you're an interplanetary soul. You come from a highly evolved culture in the universe, and you agreed at the soul level to come to Earth because Earth needs your wisdom, your perspective, your sage knowledge.
Do people ever go backwards? I mean, are they ever in grad school and then they go back to a number 2? No, it's always evolving.
You can't go backwards.
Do you think that when this earthly life is over for you, do you want to come back?
That's a great question.
Because I don't want to. I've made it very clear there. I'm like done.
Well, couple comments, Marla. That's great. I love the kind of organic nature of conversation like this, because it melds into where it needs to be. Okay, so I think we're talking about 2 or 3 different things. One is, so I know I'm an earth-based soul. I've been coming here ad nauseum for a long time. And so more than likely I will come back, partly because I'm an earth-based soul. So, I mean, do I love all the things that go on in our human culture? Not necessarily. But if you're not an earth-based soul, which you're probably right about yourself, that you may well be interplanetary, then it would almost make more sense for you to say, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to go back to Earth. The other really important piece is of course, we have a higher self. We only have a portion of our soul and body. Our higher selves, mine, yours, anyone's, our higher selves have responsibilities and agreements, commitments in the higher realm. So just because we don't come back necessarily doesn't mean we're going to get to go, lay by the swimming pool and drink Mai Tais and, eat chips all afternoon. Because that's not what souls do. Souls have commitments and agreements. I'm at times aware, and I teach people to do this too. I'm at times aware that something has shifted with the agreements of my higher self. And that will at times affect me until I adjust to it, or I just accept that the reason I've had 2 or 3 nights of choppy sleep, or a couple of days of just feeling sort of off. And once my higher self adjusts and then I adjust, then those symptoms go away. But our souls have jobs.
Yes. Well, I've interviewed, and I've also had a lot of personal experience with mediums where people on the other side have talked about the work that they're doing, helping people come in and transition, or even children, or whatever it may be. Very important jobs on the other side.
Yeah, there are many different responsibilities on the other side that relate to coordination of groups of, how can I say this simply? The higher realm has what we might call councils.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah. You want me to go there?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's my understanding from regression. Let's talk for just a minute about earth-based souls. So in the higher realm, the higher frequency tied to Earth, there are experienced souls that make up what we would call a high council, meaning those souls come together in the spiritual realm to try to come to agreement about how to help humans, how to help guide humans. I can tell you that there's nothing perfect about souls in the higher realm. They may not always agree with how to guide humans, but it is their job to work to coordinate the work of guides, the lives of humans as best they can. There is an interplanetary council. There's also an angelic realm council.
Mhm. But the councils, they don't get all emotional. And I mean, it's still all done in unconditional love, I'm sure.
Yes, it is done in respectful
Yes.
conversation that is not negative or defaming or heavily conflictual.
Mhm. So is almost all your work this kind of work now? I mean, like today, mostly past life regressions and the other regressions.
My work at this point, and has been for quite a long time, is exclusively regression. I also do what I call spiritual mentoring, which is a form
Yes.
of counseling from a soul perspective. I teach people how to guide regression. I also teach virtual courses about soul and all of this kind of detail.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So what does Earl think? Is he really proud of you?
You know, I mean, our journey together, we've been together over, well, we've been married almost 55 years. And so we've been together a bit longer than that. Many things have changed in our life, as you would imagine. He is equally spiritual as I am, and he's he's actually a channel. He doesn't channel and do private sessions. He channels only for us, but he is actually more intuitive than I am. So
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. An interesting household. Well, I know we need to wrap it up soon, but I would like to talk about ascension and what define it and why is it important to understand ascension?
You know, people use that term in lots of different ways.
Mhm.
If we think about an individual soul and ascension, then we're talking about ascending that, we might say, that ladder of soul evolution. And the higher we climb, the more wisdom we gain. It might mean we no longer incarnate, that, and underscore might mean. It also means our responsibilities as a soul expand and grow.
Yes.
And you know, some people talk about ascending of the earth or ascending of the human culture. In my opinion, the human culture still has so many unresolved issues.
Ah,
You know,
agreed.
we're not anywhere near that. So, but I think so many different people use that term in a variety of ways. So an ascended soul can be a soul that is no longer incarnating, but then takes on huge coordination and guide responsibilities from the higher realm.
So it's almost always like growing, really ascending. It's a much bigger word, divine word. But so Linda, if you could take a walk, knowing all that you do today, if you could take a walk with your 6-year-old self,
Mm.
what would you say?
Hmm. That's a cool question too. Boy, I think I would say that's so interesting. I would say you have no idea where your life is going to go, and if you did, you might be surprised. Um, you will gain a lot of sense of confidence in how you live your life that you don't have now. I think I'd say take time to just be 6.
Mhm.
Just be a 6-year-old. because you soon will be 7 and 8 and, so on and so forth. But I truly think I would say there are some very exciting, demanding, fascinating things coming, and it has to unfold all in due time.
Yes, beautiful. Are there any words of wisdom or anything like you'd like to say that I haven't asked?
I think I would just say to people to really, as much as they can, to trust that they are always being guided, that guides support us at all times,
Mm,
and to pay attention to doors that seem to look maybe not fully open, but cracked open, and pay attention to doors that don't open. And that, in my opinion, means the direction, the opportunities you have, and maybe a direction you're not meant to be going.
right.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Linda. This has been so much fun. And if people want to find you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah. Let me just say thank you. It's always my pleasure to do this. So thank you
Yes.
for inviting me and doing what you do. People can
Okay.
find me at my website, and it is 3 words run together: Raven, like the bird; heart, like the heart in your chest; center, the American spelling, not the British spelling. So RavenHeartCenter.com. I am doing almost all of my work just like this on actually on Zoom.
Mhm.
So I used to travel a lot, and COVID changed that. And so I'm very accessible now. And so RavenHeartCenter.com. And if people have questions, they're welcome to write to me.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much. It's been a joy.
great. My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Give Colorado a big hug from me.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.